Hello and welcome to this fascinating presentation on the Middle Ages, which is one of the longest of our lectures because there is a lot going on. This covers several centuries, so let us dive right in. First of all, a little social and historical context. We're talking about the 1100s, coming out of the Dark Ages. We're starting to see actual stable kingdoms. The Capetian dynasty, down here in France. Over in Germany, we have the Holy Roman Empire going on. Now, remember, Germany is not Germany yet, so we do not think it as one unified country. That comes much later. I'll let you know. I'll give you a heads up. And, of course, England. Over here, after William the Conqueror invaded England, successfully defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, and united the Kingdom of England. Now, Scotland and Ireland are in here as well. Sorry about that. They are still separate kingdoms. Who was the major power in politics? The church. The kings needed church for legitimizations, and the church needed kings to protect their lands and holdings. So it was kind of a symbiotic relationship. We also see a way to keep power is the rise of the feudal system, where vassals owed allegiance to strong nobility. So you might have a knight who has a castle. He will owe allegiance to maybe somebody higher, like a baron, who in turn holds allegiance to a duke, who in turn holds allegiance to a king. So we get, like I said, this feudal system, which is in play for us. Now, this led to greater stability, which led to increased commerce. This in turn leads to population concentrations in economic centers, towns, and cities. So you see this with this consolidation, this legitimization of power, you start to see stability, which is a good thing. There are a couple of things that happened, though, in the medieval history, in the medieval world between the 11th and 13th century that we do need to talk about. The first of these were the Crusades. The Crusades, if you did not know, to mention briefly, were a series of military campaigns to restore Jerusalem to the Christian world. Jerusalem and the Holy Land at that time, which is now modern-day Israel, was in the hands of the Muslims, which is a relatively new religion, a new faith, and Christians weren't really keen on that. So they went to take it back. Ultimately, they failed, but they did have 7 crusades. These were blessed by the Pope. What did they do? They opened up the East to Western Europe. So we get trade, we get new ideas and technologies. Also the idea of chivalry and religion. Probably most importantly, they made the cities of Italy very prosperous. They were sort of at the crossroads of this East-West trades. And this is what's going to fuel the Renaissance, which is going to propel us into the modern world. Socially, never before since a clear division between the classes. Land was power. If you had land, your family would become nobility. If you didn't, you were going to become a worker, a serf, a peasant. And to hold on to this land, aristocracy was hereditary. It was considered the will of gods. That made it very convenient there. Now, we do have a prosperous middle class by the late Middle Ages. So, and this came about because of towns, right? We talked about population centers, so a rising merchant class. The bourgeoisie, if you will, began to exert some real power. However, outside of the towns, the power was in the hands of the aristocracy. So the aristocracy were the country folk, the merchants were the city folk. At the bottom of this ladder, you have the peasants, which are tied to the land over generations. Your father, yourself, your sons and daughters, your grandsons and granddaughters will work the land. There's really no upward mobility. This happens for hundreds of years. However, due to the second great event of the Middle Ages, the Black Death, that will change. The bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death, roiled across Europe between the years of 1348 to 1350. That's 2 years, and in that time, it is estimated that half the population of Europe died. It was extremely contagious. Hardest hit were the peasants, who lived in mostly unsanitary conditions. We know today that it was caused by fleas that rode on the backs of rats, which are in mostly unsanitary conditions, but at the time they had no idea how to stop it. There was no discrimination between classes, so everybody could get it. So we started getting these wild theories about how to stop it. One belief that bathing was a bad thing. That's why the Middle Ages has a reputation for not so great hygiene. If you bathed regularly, that would clean and open the pores. Now, we would think that's a good thing, but at the time they thought humors would enter the body. If your pores were closed, the plague can't get you. But how do you get clean? Well, linen undergarments. Easy to make, plentiful, so you wear linen undergarments which absorb sweat and grime from the body. And at the end of the days, or really several days, just remove it. Discard it, burn it, put on fresh linens. And that way, you're clean and healthy. Sometimes they don't burn it. They would also toss it away or boil it. Now, here's the thing. It did affect peasants a lot. When peasants died off, agriculture fell off. If there's nobody around, if everybody's dying off, there's nobody to work the land. The aristocracy don't know how to do it. They own it, but they don't know how to farm it. They don't know how to tend livestock. So we start to see overlords lost revenues from unused farm. There wasn't enough labor to go around. Now, what did that do? That was good for the peasants, because now they can demand better working conditions and higher wages. In addition, merchants were needed by desperate landlords to get their goods to market. So you start to see a shifting of power from the aristocracy to the middle and even the lower classes there. So this is a good thing. With the shifting of power, though, it was inevitable, but as with change, the old guard wants to resist as much as they can. So they still tried to maintain the status quo. They passed laws to protect their exalted status. One of these were sumptuary laws, which we've talked about before, which states what percentage of a person's wage could be spent on clothing. They also discerned what types of fabrics could be worn by which social class. The idea was to protect the social fabric. Social fabric. I apologize for that pun. Here's some examples of sumptuary laws. In France, the number of costumes a person could purchase per year was regulated by income and social rank. A territorial lord, like a marquis, baron, could order as many as 4. Knights and bannerets, bannerets being sort of a junior knight, were limited to 3, one of which must be for summer. England ruled that a merchant worth £1,000 could wear the same clothing as a knight worth £500. Similarly, for a merchant worth £200 and a knight worth £100. So you can start to see the shifting away already from aristocracy to the merchant class. So money talks. 1336 English law. No knight under the estate of a lord, esquire, or gentleman, nor any person shall wear any shoes or boots having spikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches under the forfeiture of 40 pence. We will see that a sign of status is pointy shoes. No, I'm not kidding. And then if your shoes were too long and you weren't a knight or gentleman, then you have to cough up 40 pence. At the time, not on small sum. The English law of 1363, wives and daughters of servants were not to wear veils above 12 pence in value. The wife and daughter of an esquire gentleman not to wear velvet, satin, or ermine. The importation of silk and lace by Lombards and other foreigners was forbidden. So you can see this is the first real tariffs where they didn't want Lombard silk and lace dealers competing with the English lace dealer. Let's move on to fabric production. Cloth production had become an industry. So we don't have people weaving at home as much anymore. It's actually taken over by guilds which regulate trade, production, and prices. The system was textile traders bought fibers from the growers or wool from the shepherds, sold it to weavers. The weaver would spin the yarn, make the cloth, sell it either to tailors or dyers, who were usually Italian, for further finishing. Wool was a very important fabric. At the time, we'll talk a little bit later about the little ice age. So wool was needed. England was the largest wool producer, had the finest wool. Flanders had the best weavers. Flanders is in northern Europe, kind of where I think Belgium is today. They were masters at turning that English wool into cloth. Linen everywhere was plentiful. Silk, now cat's out of the bag from China. Italy and Sicily had plenty of silk and become big silk manufacturers even to this day. Spanish cotton was prized, a unique and rare fabric. The Middle Ages is the first time also where we actually see fashion becoming important. So we start to see it as a status symbol, more extravagant silhouettes, no longer worn for utility and comfort, but also to make a statement, to show off your wealth or importance, or just how beautiful you are. A couple of interesting new techniques in weaving lead to some new fabrics. The first of these is batiste, made by the French weaver Baptiste Chambray. It's a finely woven sheer linen or cotton in a plain weave. It's considered the lightest of opaque fabric. It moves well. It's opaque. It's also called cambric. You see by this picture here, good material is it's used today, usually called cambric today. Good material for a slip under a wedding gown. Another fabric that gained immense popularity was velvet. Now, velvet is not a material as such or a fiber. It is a weaving technique, usually made of silk or fine cotton, very big among the upper classes. It had an extra set of weft threads. So remember, usually with a plain weave, there's warp threads and weft threads. You add an extra set of them, you get what's called a pile or raised texture. So you need a light fabric, a light cotton or silk. You need a simple pattern because it's heavy. As you can see on the picture here, fabric will hang gracefully under its own weight and make a beautiful silhouette with nice, lovely, luxurious folds. But it is a heavy fabric because it has that extra thread in it. Also, we talk about another popular fabric is damask, originally made in the city of Damascus in the Middle East. Damask is made of linen, cotton, or silk. It is a pattern much like brocade, which you may remember from the Byzantine section, but it is reversible. One set of threads is woven flat, while the other is given a satin pattern, which means it is above the warp, so it has a sheen. Very popular with clothes, and also later it will become a wallpaper pattern. I kid you not. Finally, let's talk about jersey knit, which is very popular with us even to this day. It is attributed to weavers inhabiting the Isle of Jersey in the English Channel. Technique usually used for wool, but now wool and wool cotton blends. Jersey fabric has a grain, vertical ribs on the front or right side, horizontal ribs on the back or wrong side. We can also pile them like velvet. You can see in this picture here, I know red on magenta is not good. You can see the ribbing there. What does this do? It's a knit, so it can stretch up to 25% along its grain. It also drapes and clings incredibly well. So it's an ideal fabric for upper end t-shirts, women's tops, dresses, and that sort of thing because it fits to the body, but it also moves with the body, which makes it extremely popular. Probably right now you either are wearing or you own something that is jersey knit. Quickly, a couple of new fashion terms. Gore, which is a triangular shaped fabric piece that is intended to add gradual fullness to the garment. Usually, skirts consist of 2 or more gores. They allow closer fit over the hips and then gradually flare out. As you can see here, here's a typical gore. So you can see the idea is this is a skirt pattern that it hugs the hips. This is mostly for women's wear, and then it will flare out, which will make a nice, pleasing silhouette. A gusset is a small piece of fabric, diamond shaped, sewn to the underarm of a sleeve or into the crotch of pants. The reason so is because legs and arms move, and as they move, if the fabric is not a knit and doesn't move along, there's a good idea you will tear it. Tear a hole in your pants or rip out the undersleeve of your garment. So you put these gussets in, they add additional width and stretch, and they won't tear as easily. Armscye, which is basically the armhole where the sleeve is sewn. The neckline or the décolletage, usually meant for women's wear. The décolletage, the neckline, this is what we're talking about right here on a woman's garment. Time for a new technological innovation, the spinning wheel, which will change everything. Now remember, we talked about this before, way back in the Egyptian section. that yarn was spun using a distaff and spindle, which was a fairly laborious process, and the fibers were not consistent. Somewhat tedious, and it required a great deal of skill. When the Crusades occurred, remember we said that's very important, they discovered that Arabic fabrics were very nice quality. They were uniform, consistent, the thread count. So they say, how does this happen? Well, the spinning wheel, apparently developed in Baghdad in the 11th century. Well, we want some of that, so of course, like Europeans, they just took it, took the idea. It caught on slowly. Now, it took a couple hundred years for somebody to figure out that if you add a foot treadle to the spinning wheel, it will make it faster and more uniform. So it quickly replaces the spindle after that as the main spinning tool. It's able to get great quality yarn spun, relatively short amount of time. Also more consistent, so we start to see greater quality in European fabric. Here's a link to a short video, about 2.5 minutes, with a woman with a charming Scottish accent on how to use the spinning wheel and how to combine the different fibers into thread. She is using wool. This concludes part 1 of our presentation. With part 2, we'll look at the 11th and 12th centuries. See you then.